going to read a few words from John chapter 8, just 5-6 verses from John chapter 8, verse 31, where it says, "To the Jews who had believed in him," being Jesus, Jesus said, "If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Wonderful words that we're familiar with. It says, they answered him, "We are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we should be set free?" Jesus replied, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." Very familiar words and words that we're aware of. It's the start. Like I said, I was thinking of where we go next. We've been doing abide. If you notice, this passage starts with an abide kind of idea. It says, if you remain, if you follow my commands, you are truly my disciples. If you remain in that, that's what we've been looking at for the last couple of months together, this idea of abiding, remaining, that connection that we need. But that's meant to lead to something, and the thing it leads to is freedom. So I thought I think it's 4 or 5 weeks we've got until Easter. I thought we could spend some time just picking apart freedom. The freedom that we're to have in Jesus, the freedom he promises us. And I want to take you back to the year 2 BC. I don't mean before Christ, I mean before children, which for us was about 2015, when I had more energy and more time and the ability to do all sorts of things. And my sister and her husband and I, we did the 3 Peaks Challenge, where you go to Ben Nevis and Scafell and Snowdon. It's not called Snowdon, but I can't remember what the other name is, so we'll stick with Snowdon. And you climb up them, you try and do it in 24 hours, and you get ferried between one or the others. And so we started off, we flew to Scotland, went to Ben Nevis first, and started off in the afternoon, or sort of late morning, early afternoon. Went up, climbed up, a steep climb, going up the steps, following the weaving track up to the top. Got to the top, stood at the top of Ben Nevis, and the fog rolled in, and we could see about 20 feet in front of us. We thought, that's fine, we've got 2 more mountains to go. So down we come, off we go to the next mountain, Scafell, climbing up that in the middle of the night. We're going up and up, get to the top. It's obviously pitch black at the top, and we can see maybe 10 metres up there. And so that's fine, we've still got 1 left. Come down, go to Snowdon. As we get there, the rain starts to roll in, so we climb up, going up this difficult pit. Got to the top, probably about 5 metres on Snowdon, and then we came down, and everyone said, "Did you enjoy it?" And we said, well, it was a challenge. What about the views? There weren't any. And for me, that becomes a picture, I think, of how our Christian life can often be. We kind of get to the top and we think there's going to be wide open vistas, there's going to be vast expanse, there's going to be joy, there's going to be these things to enjoy, things to savour. There's life, isn't it? It's life in the full. And yet what it often feels like is that you're stood on the top of a mountain, but you can't see more than a few metres in front of you. That you're promised all this stuff. It's meant to be so good, so wonderful what Jesus has done, and yet it doesn't feel like we can see it. A normal life, the successes and the failures, they feel hollow and you feel heavy, and you start to wonder, is there more than this? If you remember, the Alpha course, when it started, posed a simple question that has drawn thousands, perhaps even millions, to come and do the course together. Is there more to life than this? This sense that we have, that with all that we have and all that we do, there is something still missing. You might remember there was an advert that went around London for a while on the side of buses where it said, "There is probably no God, so get on and enjoy your life." Do you remember that? This advert run by Atheist Society. There is probably no God, so get on and enjoy your life. First problem with that is the word probably. Doesn't sound too certain. It's a big thing to claim if it's just a probably. And the second thing is get on and enjoy your life. How's that going for everyone? How are we doing with that? Is it all, if we get rid of God, does everything become easy and light? Do we become free? Do we open up? Do we become better human beings? Do we become more considerate? Are we more loving? Are governments running well and society working and culture? Is it thriving when we remove God from the situation? The reality is, as we look around us, while we claim more and more freedom for ourselves, society, culture, people, individuals seem more and more restrained, seem more and more confined, seem more and more like something is missing, hollow, empty. There's a word, meh, M-E-H. It's in the dictionary now, so we have to accept it. Meh. And it's kind of this feeling, it sums up a whole culture kind of, There's just nothing to it, that you could have these things in front of you. You can have all this wonderful. You have choice. You have so much you can do. So many places you can go. So much freedom. And yet inside we're kind of like, we're not bothered. It doesn't resonate. We're not singing from our souls. We're hollow shells. We're trapped. We're trapped by choice. We're trapped by the freedoms that are offered to us. There's sexual freedom, yet people are lonelier than they've ever been. There's identity freedom, yet people are more confused about who they are and what their role is. There's religious freedom, and yet people are still going, who is God and what is he up to? There's financial freedom. We're better off than ever before, and yet we're struggling to find any sort of meaning, anything that would satisfy. There's personal freedom, and yet we don't know what our purpose is. All this. And when we put all the way we're living next to life in the full, just those words, it seems like we're missing something. This abundant life, unstoppable life, freedom that Jesus talks about. We, I believe, worship the God of the so much more. Is there more to life than this? The answer that Alpha answers is yes. We have a God of the so much more. A God who wants freedom and wants life in its fullness. And he says that himself. We don't put those words in his mouth. That's what he's offering us. And today, in the next few weeks, I thought we could just explore how free we really are. And just try and examine, because we want to be free. We long to be free, and yet we often aren't. And freedom is promised to us. Sealed by the death of Jesus, guaranteed by his resurrection and his ascension, we can be free. And it's not just wishful thinking. We exist often on a mountain with no view, but over the next few weeks I hope to perhaps clear some fog, clear some of the clouds, turn the lights on, the sun on, so that we can see and just drink in the view. Even if we haven't attained it yet, drink it in and say, there is something more, isn't there? Because the problem is we often learn to live with a ceiling or a limitation or a restraint. And I believe that's what's going on in Jesus' time. I can't remember if it's... Sorry, my clicker's being a bit funny, Paul. You might have to help me out. Thank you. Go on to the next one. Here we go. So here's how the conversation starts. It says, to the Jews who believed him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. So as I say, here's the abide. If you hold, if you remain, if you continue, if you connected to my teaching, to my voice, to my presence, if you do that, then you're my disciples. You're learning, you're growing, you're becoming more free, and this is what I want for you. And then you get this response from the people, where they say to him, come on, Paul. Drum roll. Then you will know the truth, and the truth... Oh, that's not the one. Is that the one? There you go. They answered him, we are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free? Jesus puts out this idea, like I have, of freedom. You can be free. And the people who originally hear that go, this is irrelevant because we are free. What are you talking about? We have never been slaves of anyone, which displays the hugest ignorance of their history. If you've read the Bible, you know that slavery is baked into their story. The whole story of Israel is that they were slaves under Pharaoh, and that God set them free from being slaves under Pharaoh. And then the rest of their journey was they were constantly oppressed, they were constantly invaded, they were dragged off into Babylon as slaves, and for hundreds of years spent that time as slaves in Babylon, longing to be brought back. And when they got brought back, everything wasn't as it should be, and the Romans had come and taken over and were dominating them. And as they're saying this, the Romans are oppressing them. As they're saying this, there's literally Romans living around them on their doorstep, in their lives, telling them what they can and can't do, telling them where they can and can't go, and how they should live, and demanding taxes from them. And yet they say, come on, Jesus, we're free. And you go, really? But in that, I think we see something of ourselves. You're free. You can be free. If I tell you you can be free, you go, I already am. Because I can vote how I want, and I can go where I want, and I can live how I want, and I can do all these things, and I can make all this choice. I'm not a slave of anyone. And I wonder if there is something of us in them where actually we haven't seen that we're still slaves. Jesus invites us to freedom, and we don't take the offer because we think we're already free. We haven't realized how great the freedom is that Jesus offers us. See, there are different types of people in Jesus' time. There was one group, and they were called the Zealots. this small group of people, and their response to the Romans invading them, there might be a picture just to explain the Zealots. Their response to the Romans oppressing them was, we're going to fight against them. We're going to kill them. We're going to revolt against them. A few hundred years before Jesus, there'd been a big revolution where a Roman emperor had tried to worship a pagan god in the temple, and there'd been a huge fight, and they'd won this fight. They demanded purity. They wanted to restore things to the way they were, and the way they were going to do that was to kill and to fight and to resist this oppression. And some of us, that's what freedom is like for us, that we want freedom, but in doing the freedom, we get trapped. See, these people, they thought they were free. We're fighting, we're resisting this oppression. We're not going to be like everyone else. We're going to be free. But they've been captured by another spirit, the spirit of anger, the spirit of bitterness, the spirit of violence, the spirit of destruction. And while they were trying to get themselves free, they'd been captured by something else. Jesus had a few of these in his disciples. Simon the Zealot is one of these guys who'd take a sword and use it to get his way. There's a different way to get free without getting captured by something else. The next group was the Essenes. These were a group of people who didn't like the oppression and the corruption of Rome. So their way of dealing with it was, we're going to take ourselves off and hide somewhere else. Then we'll be free. We'll remove ourselves from this icky culture, all this yucky stuff that's going on, all these dirty Romans and dirty pagans and all these people. We're going to take ourselves off. And when we take away... You're right, Peter. Excuse me. I think Peter's okay. Got Marie on the job. It's all good. Okay. We'll carry on, I think. Where were we? Essenes. So the Zealots, they were going to get free by violence. The Essenes, they were going to remove themselves, and that's how they were going to get free. But again, you end up with this weird situation. We're free because we've taken ourselves off. We're in a nice little enclave. We can do what we want. But you ask, are you really free? Because you can't touch anyone else. You can't be in normal life. You have to live a very strange life to be removed from this situation. You claim you're free because you've taken yourself out, but really you've just created a nice gilded prison for you somewhere else. A nice little place where you've taken yourself off and you're no longer with all this stuff. You're not actually making a difference. You've removed yourself. So again, they would say, well, we're free. But you go, well, are you? There's another group, a group that perhaps we're more familiar with, and they were called the Pharisees. And the Pharisees, they were free because they obeyed God's law. And they obeyed God's law plus all the other laws that they created. And so they'd gone, if we do what God says, we will be free. That was their plan. Oh, but that's difficult. So let's add some more clarity to what God has said so that we really can be free. And if you know anything about the Pharisees, you know that Jesus often speaks to them and says, you put a yoke on other people that destroys them. You put a pressure, a burden on people that they cannot bear. You add to God's law. They were religious people, so there's a freedom in religion, but they'd taken it too far. And while they would claim they're free because we obey God better than anyone else, they'd added all these man-made rules to it that meant that they weren't free. They just added a load more stuff so that they were trapped in their own traditions and their own patterns to the point where they can't see God's promises even as they're fulfilled before their eyes. And the last group are the Sadducees. I might have skipped over one, might have to go back. But the Sadducees are slightly different to the Pharisees. They are the elite of the culture. They're wealthy, they're high up, they're political people, they're well off. And they would say, well, we're free because look at us. We've got homes, we've got land, we're well off, we're obeying the Torah, we're doing all these things. But what the Sadducees had done is they started working with the Romans, working alongside them in their corruption to keep their position and their power. They would say, we're free because look how wealthy we are and how powerful we are and influential, but we still have to do what Rome says. We still have to obey and pay our taxes, and when they want something from us, we have to submit to them. See, each of these groups would claim, like they do to Jesus, we're free. What are you talking about? We're free. But in their freedom, they've exchanged one form of slavery for another. And that is really what I wanted to focus on today as we start this series. When I come, or when Jesus comes and says, I will set you free, most of us will say, well, I already am. I don't need any more freedom, thank you very much. I've already been set free. I already believe in Jesus even. But there is a danger in each of us that we've simply swapped one form of slavery for another. Maybe we've been set free from something, but there's something else that still traps us. We've been set free from one way of thinking, but we've fallen into another. Or one part of our life has been dealt with and we've been set free. The chains have come off, but there's still another where we're enslaved and we're trapped. And Jesus' response to them when they say this is this is ridiculous. You've been slaves nearly your whole lives. And so as he responds to them, what he says is, now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. That you're still slaves, you've just stopped calling it slavery. And what we do is if we swap one truth for another truth, it turns out to be a lie and we end up enslaved by it. But we stop calling it slavery. We're filled, there is shame, there's insecurity, we compromise our integrity, we aren't whole, that there's parts of us that we aren't aware of, there are identities that are under fire, our destiny is under fire, the way that we live, our human condition, and one generation to the next, we forget and we just grow up and think the way things are the way they're meant to be, which is actually Israel's history. One generation gets delivered from slavery and they praise God because he set them free from the oppression of Pharaoh. And the next generation grow up with the stories of their parents saying, we were once slaves and we were set free, and they remember and they hold on to it. And the next generation after that grows up with the stories of their grandparents who told them, we were free, we were slaves, but now we're free, but it's becoming a bit more distant and removed. And the generation after that doesn't hear the stories anymore. And they forget what it was to be slaves and then to be free. And then the generation after that, it stops being talked about and stops being shared. And you see, as Israel goes through these cycles, one generation after another, they get enslaved again because they forget that God has come to set them free. And if you're free, then you're free indeed. We think that if we have all that we want, if we can choose all we want, then we are free. But we're simply enslaved by another spirit. If we have academic success or sporting success or good Christian values as a goal, they're admirable, but as a master, they're awful. And if they enslave us, they end up destroying us. And that's the danger of slavery. It's not just that you're going to miss out on some nice stuff. It's that anything that's a master will eventually destroy you. Anything that you put in charge of our life, whatever it might be, that you give your allegiance to, that you serve, will destroy you, because there are no other good masters apart from the good God who made us, the one who formed us. And you can have enough money and a dream car and success and think, oh, I'm starting to get free, but you end up enslaved to the love of money, which Jesus talks about. You end up enslaved to, this is what my family want me to do, or enslaved to, this is what people want me to do, or this is what culture tells me I should do. And we end up exchanging these things, and it's not true freedom. We live under a yoke. We get escaped from Pharaoh only to end up serving another Pharaoh. And so we end up anxious. We end up a mess. We end up not knowing life in its fullness. We have mindsets and lies that feed into us. So Jesus comes and says, I've come to set you free, but you have to see that you aren't free to start with. And in our culture, the worst slavery we have is the slavery of freedom. We have more choice than ever before. And yet we don't know what the right thing to do is. We don't know how we're meant to live or what we're meant to be like. We have more opportunities than ever before, but we can't use them for God's glory. We have more financial stability than anyone else, and yet we're enslaved by the love of money and the pursuit of things. We think that we can make things right by our own effort, and we end up making them worse. And just like the Zealots and the Essenes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, we're all different groups of people who think that we're free, but something is keeping us trapped. And Jesus comes and says, here's the answer. The answer isn't to try and fight it like you Zealots, and the answer isn't to try and remove yourself or to try and just be better or try harder or be successful. What you need, if you're going to be free, is to have a change. You need someone to deliver you from slavery and to deliver you from slavery into a family where you belong. And so Jesus says, here's the answer. A slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. Here's what slavery does. It says, you better work hard or you're going to get in trouble. You better achieve or something's going to happen to you. And it will either be I'll cut you off, or I'll be disappointed, or I'll be angry, or you'll fall apart. Whatever it is, it's this lie that we're believed. It's the first lie that humanity ever believed. You aren't safe. You aren't loved. You aren't secure. You better try and do this by yourself. You better make your own choices. And in that, we thought we were becoming free, and we ended up enslaved. We like to think that we can choose freedom, but we can't. We simply choose another slavery. Jesus says, I've come to set you free. I know you think you are, but you're miserable. So much, like I say, as you look at culture, this culture that proclaims we're all free, so many people are simply miserable. We're slaves to sin. We're slaves to the enemy. We're slaves to lies. And we bring these excuses that it's just the way I am. It's just how I do things. Everybody else does it. It hasn't hurt me yet. It's my right. It's my choice. I can do what I want. And you can. You can do what you want and still be miserable and still be heartbroken at the person that it makes you. Everyone who sins, Jesus says, is a slave to sin. And then 1 John, it points out that if you claim you have no sin, then the truth is not in you. And it's the truth that sets you free. We all recognize it, but we want to bring it into the light. We live under a slave master, and its name is sin. Not sins. There's a difference. Sin, without an S, is the master, this thing that dominates, this thing that imprisons, this lie, this deception that we all follow. And that results in sins. The life we live where we make choices, we do things that disappoint, that hurt, that break, that harm, that destroy this good world and us who God created. And Jesus says, what I'll do is I'll take you from that and I'll put you into a family. The gospel is that God has sent a liberator. Just like in the time of Pharaoh, God sent a Moses, a liberator for his people. He has sent a liberator who would break the back of the slave master, who would break the chains of the one who enslaves us, and who would lead us into freedom. Jesus says, if you sin, you're a slave to sin, but I will make you a son. When John writes his gospel, he starts with these words, whoever received him, he gave the right to become children of God. Because what Jesus did was make us children, and when we are children, we're free. I'm free. I'm exactly who I'm meant to be when I'm a child. And I don't fear rejection, and I don't fear that if I don't get it right, that he will turn away, that I'm loved and I'm secure, and in that I can grow into the freedom that he has for me. If the Son sets you free, he goes on to say, you will be free indeed. In the coming weeks leading up to Easter, we're going to look at some of the places that Jesus wants to free us from, some of the paths that we need to follow to find that freedom, some of the practices that enslave us and the ones that will set us free. But today, I just want you to take away the promise of freedom. I started reading this week Pilgrim's Progress. I remember reading it in school, and some of the pictures stayed in my mind. And there was an image that stuck with me that I thought, I can't remember what it was, but I went back to the book. And it says in the book that Christian, the traveller in the story, and his friend Hopeful are travelling through a land and they fall asleep. And it says that as they sleep, the giant Despair, roams through his land, and he finds these two people asleep. And he captures them and he brings them back to his castle, and he puts them in a cage. And it says they're in there from Wednesday to Saturday. And then on the Saturday, after they've been beaten and tortured, they've been tempted to take their own lives. The giant can't kill them, but he's trying to make them take their own lives. And he keeps coming and beating them and keeps insulting them and accusing them of all sorts of things. And they're desperate. They want a way out, and they're trying to figure out what to do. And it says, around midnight, the pilgrims started praying and continued until almost dawn. And suddenly, Christian realized something important. He exclaimed in a moment of clarity that he had been foolish to suffer in the dungeon when he had the means to escape. He remembered he had a key called Promise in his pocket, which he believed could unlock any lock in Doubting Castle. Hopeful encouraged him to try it. Christian took out the key and used it to unlock the dungeon door, which opened instantly. They quickly left the dungeon and proceeded to the outer door leading to the castle yard, which Christian also unlocked with the key. Next, they faced the iron gate of the castle, the toughest lock yet, but the key finally opened it. The key of promise. And in that, John Bunyan, the writer, is saying that there is a freedom that we have, a key that we've all been given, but we failed to use it. The key of promise, the promise of forgiving. You see, everything that enslaves you, everything that you wish wasn't a part of you, every habit, every pattern of thought, every behavior, every mindset, every echo, every bit of unforgiveness, all those things that enslave us and keep us trapped, every single one is either a promised freedom that we have or a present experience that we can have. You will be free, because if you're free indeed, and one day you'll be free of all of them, either by promise in the future or by present experience now. And the difference is whether you take the key out of your pocket and use it. If you notice in the story, they're in the castle from Wednesday to Saturday, and it's Sunday morning when they finally break free. John Bunyan does that on purpose because it's Sunday morning when Jesus leaves the tomb and is free indeed. Where death no longer has a say on him. It doesn't imprison him anymore. Where sin no longer has a say in his life anymore. Where the toll and the stress of the curse no longer keeps him. Where the influence and the voice of others no longer has control over him. At that moment when Jesus walks out of the tomb, he doesn't say, great, now I can do what I want. But it's now he is exactly who God made him to be, in all his glory and all his goodness. No longer held by the curse, no longer held by sin. When Jesus leaves and ascends on high, one verse says he leads captivity captive. It's in the King James. I think the modern translations do it a bit differently, but that word, he leads captivity captive. He takes the thing that captures us and he makes it captive. He takes the things that enslaves them and he enslaves it. He takes all the things that oppress us and he oppresses them. He takes everything that would destroy us and he destroys it. It's this idea that when Jesus does this, he's destroying. He's not exchanging one freedom for another. He's not saying you're a slave there, now you can be a slave here. He's not you enslaved by that, now you can be in religious slavery. It's you were a slave, now you're a child because I've destroyed everything that enslaves you. Everything that sought to enslave or captive Jesus, his trials, his temptations, the accusations, the beatings, the crucifixion, death, all the sins of the world laid on him. Satan doing his worst, it does it all, and then it is crushed. And as the old language says, set to naught. For Christ triumphs over it. Every foe that sought to destroy him, he destroys, and now there's nothing left to ensnare us. There's nothing left to enslave us. Pharaoh is defeated. The old regime is gone. And while we often stand on a mountain and can only see a few feet in front of us, the key of promise is in our pocket. The promise of freedom for us. The promise that whatever it is that does enslave you still will either now in the present be shaken off or in time to come. And let me say it in the weeks to come, God is very gentle and very patient and very gracious in how he sheds off the layers that enslave us. He shows us over time and time again the layers of things that we need to get rid of, the things that keep us, the things that are holding us back. But he does it gradually and gradually. But each one, whether it's the gate of the cage, whether it's the gate of the castle, whether it's the iron gate in the outer courts, each one is unlocked with the same key, the promise of freedom, because he is risen, and freedom is ours. So when Paul talks about this, I love it, because it's the kind of thing I'd put if I was trying to increase the word count on an essay. He says, for freedom, Christ has set us free. You kind of go, well, duh, that's what freedom means. But what he's saying is that for freedom, he hasn't set you free to be enslaved again by something else. He hasn't set you free, but sorry, you're going to have to put up with a lot of other things as you go along. No, it's for freedom that he has set you free. So don't be enslaved again by something else. Don't let something else capture you. You can be free of that too. You don't have to settle. God is good and gentle and patient in revealing new areas, but he does it like a father to a child. Because when you're a son, you have a permanent place. And when the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. In the next few weeks, like I say, we're going to look at habits and thoughts and lusts and insecurities and arrogances and worries, all these things that we don't like talking about. But as we bring them into the light, as we lay them before him, we're going to hopefully experience what John says. As you bring things into the light, don't hide it, because that doesn't do anyone any good. It's not achieved by effort, but as you bring it into the light, you can't break out of it, you can't pick the lock, you can't force the bars. But in the light, the key of promise will show you that whoever receives him, he gives the right to become children of God. And when you're a child, you have a permanent place. When you have a permanent place, you are no longer a slave. You're free. I know that this is the problem with the promise of freedom, like Christian experiences, is you forget it. It sits in your pocket and you don't realize it. It seems no, that's not enough. I need something else. I need to fight for it, like the zealots. I need to remove myself, clean myself up, and then I'll sort it out. I just need to be more obedient. I need to do more and try harder. And all those things might have a part to play, but until the Son sets you free, they're simply swapping one form of slavery for another. Jesus come to set you free. Just like Israel doesn't swap Pharaoh for another, they're free. Now they need to experience that freedom. So what I'd like to ask you to do just now, I'll ask Richard to just play a bit of music. I'm sure he's capable of that in a moment. And just to sit for a moment and just ask God, is there anything that I need to be set free from? It's a simple question. Jesus says, I've come to set you free. And in our hearts, we might go, well, I've got nothing to be set free from. How about we just spend a moment and just ask him, Father, is there anything that I need to be set free from? Is there any habit? Is there any mindset? Is there a lie that I'm believing? Is there something I'm holding on to? Is there something that's holding on to me? Is there something that's keeping me back from life in its fullness? And just to give you a few moments, just to ask the question. And then over the next few weeks, we'll look at what that might look like, how we might respond to that, and how God sets us free from all these things that you can have life in its fullness. So just be still for a moment with our thoughts, and I'll pray.